Greetings from Fernbrook Family Center. My name is Haley Girardi, and I'm the Family Engagement Specialist here at Fernbrook. And I am here to talk today about stress and coping. This is the third of a 5-part community education series focused on mental health. And this is brought to you by the City of Casson's Mental Health Initiative. So, without any delay, we have a lot of content to cover today, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So today we're going to talk about how the human body responds to stress, what is actually going on in our body when we are feeling that subjective experience that we call stress. Hopefully, through learning about how our body responds to stress, as well as the physical, the medical, and the mental health risks to our health, hopefully we'll really start to appreciate the importance of managing our stress. And we're going to learn a variety of techniques to cope with stress along the way that can help with that. The content that I am bringing you today comes from the American Psychological Association, a book called The Polyvagal Theory, Neurophysiological Foundations of Emotions, Attachment, Communication, and Self-Regulation, and the book Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, A Guide to Stress, Stress-Related Diseases, and Coping, as well as a recent webinar that I viewed on listening to the body, understanding the language of stress-related symptoms by a researcher in the field. Briefly, I also wanted to touch on some of the scientific methods that give us the information that we know about stress in the body. So recently, this research comes from brain imaging studies, functional MRI or fMRI, and this is the way in which we can see what different areas of the brain are active and how active they are by measuring their blood flow. So we can see, for instance, when somebody views a picture of a snake or a loved one, which areas of the brain are active during that time. And so through fMRI, we've really learned a lot of the different brain regions that are implicated in the stress response. EEG is another way that this is measured, electroencephalography. This is just measuring brain waves, so measuring brain activity, but you can't pinpoint where it's coming from. Another common measure in physiological research is skin conductance response, or SCR. When we get stressed, sometimes our hands get a little sweaty. Even if we can't feel it consciously, we have lots of blood vessels that go all throughout our body, and those are active during the stress response. Dilated, more blood is flowing, etc. We'll talk about that. But there's changes in the temperature of our hands and how much perspiration is secreted during that. And that can be measured. It's really cool. And other sorts of methods that are used are animal models. So rats especially tell us a lot about what the mammalian brain is like and how the mammalian body responds to stress. And then, of course, by measuring human behavior as well. Very quickly, a bit about myself. Again, my name is Haley Girardi. My pronouns are she and her. I'm a former PhD student in a developmental psychology program. I now, of course, am the family engagement specialist at Fernbrook, where I provide mental health skills services over telehealth. And work with our agency to bring you content such as this. So I started out in a program basically learning to be a scientist, right? So I'm bringing you some of that information today as well, or some of the background, the way that I think about this content comes from my training as well. But as far as thinking about what else I am bringing to this talk today, and what kind of lens I'm looking through, I'm also a mom to a kindergartner. And I personally am constantly learning to be more aware of my body and how I respond to stress. I feel subjectively that I have a pretty high stress response, and I'm very influenced by the way that I'm responding to stress, which we'll talk about a little bit. So I'm learning as I go along to be more aware and mindful and to alter my own stress response. And I'm really going to try to take my own advice that I'm giving today, because I love carbs and comfort food. It's lefse season right now, and I can't stand to exercise. And I know those things are so critical to how my body responds to stress and how I take care of my own mental health, especially during these times. So I definitely have a renewed motivation to really step up my game and take my own advice after putting this talk together for you. So I want to start with a question, a reflection question, if you will, to just think about for a moment, what does stress feel like in your body? Maybe this answer jumps out at you very easily and you know exactly, it feels like a stomach ache. It feels like a tension headache, or I feel it in my neck. But maybe it's something that you haven't thought about before. Stress is really, it's a cognitive sort of experience. We're giving it a label. We're perceiving that we're stressed. We're appraising a situation as stressful, but really it starts in the body. Personally, I feel stress in my stomach, in my neck and shoulders, which are pretty common. Some other common signs are heart palpitations or racing heart, chest tightness or heaviness even, rapid or shallow breathing, pain anywhere in your body, and that has to do with our musculoskeletal system that we'll talk about, headaches, changes in appetite, sleep, or mood. I mentioned that stress is a cognitive thing. We might notice it just in our thoughts, thinking a lot about the stressor or ruminating, or just kind of feeling on edge or agitated. These are all very common. So let's go a little bit further. I want you to take a few moments to focus on your body right now, in this present moment. And just think about the sensations that you notice. Just try to draw your awareness to your body and how it feels right now. Maybe it makes sense to start at your head and kind of scan down to your feet in a stepwise fashion, drawing your attention to each body part, and just notice what you feel. Do you feel any tension, tightness, or pain? And if you do, just try to focus for a moment on relaxing those muscles. I've had a lot of jaw tension and pain lately, such that I'll wake up in the morning and I can't close my left side all the way. And I know it's stress. But we have things like this. I also tend to notice a frown that I'm wearing. And I don't feel upset about anything. My kid is good at calling me out on it. Mom, why does your face look like that? And I'll say, like what? And he said, like you're frowning. And I'll say, oh, I didn't even notice. It's just stress. A lot of times we don't notice as we go about our day where we're holding tension in our body, which is a stress response. And one easy step that we can do is just taking a few moments here and there. Even, like if you have a Fitbit or some sort of a, fitness watch that tells you, hey, it's time to go take a walk right now, or stand up and stretch. We can do the same thing and set a timer on our phone and say, hey, it's time for a body scan. This is what this is called. It's a body scan. Focusing, it can just take 2 minutes, head to toe. Tune in on where you're feeling tension and stress in your body and work to soften those muscles. So I challenge you to give that a try. Okay, so as you can see, we're very focused on talking about what's happening in our bodies today. Let's dig deeper. We're going to start with the nervous system, and we're going to talk about a few different systems that are kind of the main areas that are implicated in the stress response. Either they're the ones that are really working to keep our body safe during a stressful situation or challenging situation, a life-threatening situation, or even if it just feels like that, our body sometimes doesn't know the difference. But also those that are really impacted by the stress response. And I'm not going to talk about, every system of our body is implicated in the stress response, including our reproductive system, for example. I'm not going to talk about all of them today. But we're going to start with the nervous system. Our nervous system is comprised of our central nervous system, which is our brain and our spinal cord, as well as our autonomic nervous system, which are the nerves throughout our body. So these nerves connect, literally everywhere throughout our body, down to our fingertips, down to our toes, up into our brain, and they're constantly sending signals to one another. So there are both afferent and efferent pathways, meaning that the brain sends information out, and then also our body sends information up to our brain. And our autonomic nervous system, this is a major player when we think about the stress response. These are the nerves throughout our body, and we think about them in terms of two systems. The sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight, flight, kind of freeze response. This is turning on our stress response. Our sympathetic nervous system is doing things like dilating our pupils so that we can take in lots of information about what's going on right now. It's making our heart race to pump more blood throughout our body. It's turning things on and getting us ready to fight off a predator or to run away from it or to freeze and feign dead, right? And a lot of this, we believe, and scientists believe, I should say, is rooted in what we know about evolution and what kept our body safe way back when. And so, our system is really old, and especially certain parts of our brain are specialized for processing information, automatically to keep us safe. And our world has changed very rapidly. Think of social media, for example. The information that we've gotten, that we get every day from social media is just something that our brains were never designed to handle. The way that the information that computers can process has grown astronomically compared to our brain, which hasn't really changed much at all over thousands of years. And so our system is kind of old compared to the world that we're living in today. And so sometimes we are in situations where we're having a gigantic stress response over something that, is maybe relatively minor, right? Or it certainly isn't life-threatening. We can really turn a molehill into a mountain in our mind. That's the other thing that us humans are so blessed with, is the ability to think about the future, but sometimes that turns an acute or a one-time, time-limited stressor into a chronic one. Okay, but anyway, then we also have the parasympathetic nervous system, and this is our rest and digest system. It's going to be on when we're recovering from stress, and it also is going to be on when we are making social connections with other people and we're just in safety. So these two systems are always working, and either they're working to turn on or they're working to stay turned off. Okay. All the systems in our body are very specialized. This includes different systems in our brain when we think about the central nervous system. And there are kind of two different ways that information is processed in our body. So one is top down, and usually we think about that in terms of our brain telling our body what to do. So our prefrontal cortex, for example, the newest part of our brain, that is really implicated in planning, in understanding information. It's like our higher order processes that we have as a human. It's the thinking part of our brain. And so when we're using that part of our brain, such as by labeling our emotions or talking about them with somebody, then we are sending information to the other parts of our brain and then our body. So that's from the top down. And then the other type of processing that happens is bottom-up processing, where either older parts of our brain are just sending information and then we have to try to make sense of them later, or through our body. And although scientists know a whole lot about this now, especially given the advances in technology and things like fMRI, it still is a very complex process that's being understood. Okay, so a little bit more detail with a nice little infographic here about top-down and bottom-up processing. So when I was talking about the prefrontal cortex, that's right here in our brain, in the front part of our brain. So here would be like our nose and our eyes. So right here behind on our forehead. And so this is implicated in, our self-awareness and just kind of conscious thought. And this is also where we make meaning out of the things that happen in our life. And we appraise what's happening as something that's either stressful and out of our control, or, the most horrible thing in the world, and I don't know how I can handle this. Or, this is hard, but I can do it. It's a challenge, or something that's just, not stressful at all. This is where we make meaning of this. And then this sends information, elsewhere. And as far as bottom-up processing, a couple of older areas of the brain, older evolutionarily speaking, and lower down in our brain, literally, which is another reason why they call it bottom-up. One is the amygdala, or the fear center of our brain. It's also like the alarm system in our brain that tells us, like, hey, something's going on that you need to pay attention to. And then that will send, as you can see, just automatically send signals to our hypothalamus and our pituitary and different glands, and that'll send cortisol through our body and all sorts of other things we'll kind of talk about. And then later, our prefrontal cortex needs to make meaning of that and maybe damper it if that the amygdala was overactive, for example. So that's what we mean by bottom up. And a little bit more about the autonomic system. As I mentioned, they're always both working together, and they are going to work to send signals to other organs and systems in the body, but either they're inhibiting that type of activity, or they're activating it. And so it's always one or the other. And if one's on, the other is off, right? And so one of the systems kind of within this too, we can think of other systems within the autonomic nervous system. Is the sympathetic adrenomedullary system, or the SAM system for short. This works very fast and automatically, and this helps to keep us safe. As you can see in the name, it's part of the sympathetic nervous system, and so this is the fight or flight response, and this works very fast to release energy such as epinephrine, or what we think of it as adrenaline, and glucose, which gives us energy. And as we see, we're talking about the amygdala. This happens very fast. It's not all this. This is actually part of the HPA axis, because that's another system that works. And this is a little more slow, kind of helps to regulate how we engage with that stressor over time, or with our environment over time. And we'll talk about the HPA axis a little bit more as well. Okay, so basically the nervous system, when we think of like how it responds to stress, its job is just to send messages. Well, first of all, understand what's going on and send messages and receive messages, and kind of be the organizer of everything going on, or the manager of everything going on. But the system itself doesn't necessarily get strained under stress. I would say that there's an exception to that when we think of different parts of the brain, such that, for example, the hypothalamus, which is engaged in our memory. I'm sorry, not the hypothalamus, the hippocampus. The hippocampus is a part of our brain that engages a lot with memory and other things. And what they find when they look at people who have died and were chronically depressed over time is the hippocampus is smaller, and so there can be atrophying in parts of the brain. So things like that can happen with stress, and of course we also have kind kind of a use it or lose it principle when it comes to the way that our neurons or our brain cells talk to one another. And so when we use pathways again and again and again, those pathways are going to be very strengthened. And then when we stop using them or use a different pathway and don't use that old one anymore, then that pathway, the neurons are going to weaken, the connections between them are going to weaken, and then those connections are eventually going to die. And so I should say that is one exception to the way that our nervous system can be impacted by stress as well. Okay, but let's get into the cardiovascular system, which is our heart and our arteries and our veins, our blood vessels, etc. And the first thing that I want to mention briefly is polyvagal theory, which is heavily implicated in our understanding of the stress response, especially stress recovery, and our cardiovascular system. So first, when I was talking about how our brain makes sense of information and is appraising a situation as either stressful or not, within polyvagal theory, the term for that is neuroception. So neuroception is our nervous system's ability to automatically and unconsciously detect threat or safety. And I already mentioned that then will activate or inhibit either our parasympathetic nervous system or our sympathetic nervous system. And our parasympathetic nervous system, the one that is rest or digest, we're going to recover from stress, we're going to be in a calm state, and especially what's crucial for that, when we're in a calm state and it's safe, that's where our bonding occurs. This is where we cooperate with one another. This is where we can pair bond, these sorts of things, or mate, find a partner, etc. This is where we have the parasympathetic functioning. So this is why social engagement and social connection is so important for our stress response, because when we're doing it, so long as we're in a safe environment and the people that we're with don't inherently stress us out, then we're going to be using our parasympathetic nervous system. And since we know that both are always working, either turned on or turned off, that means that our stress response will be turned off. But this is done through the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve it's more than just, it's one major nerve, but it has all sorts of other connections, and it starts in the brainstem, and it connects to the heart and other major organs, and it directly regulates our heart in response to the environment and our appraisal of if a stressful situation is happening or not. So, of course, we're talking about stress. So in regards to that, when our stress response is turned on, when we are seeing that we're in a stressful situation, we have increased heart rate. So our heart is going to beat faster to pump more blood throughout our body. We're also going to raise our blood pressure. We're going to have more volume of blood moving faster throughout our veins. Our heart is beating harder, so there's stronger contractions, hence more blood pressure. And our blood vessels initially are going to dilate or get bigger so that we can have more blood flow. And this is especially going to be true for the limbs. So we're going to have lots of dilation in the arms and the legs because this is the fight, flight, freeze response. Not so much freeze in this case, but if we need to fight, we're going to use our hands. If we need to flee, we're going to use our legs, or maybe to fight too. I don't know, maybe people are into kickboxing. So we need a lot of blood flow in those areas, right? And then that also means that when our blood goes back to our heart, there's going to be more pressure and more, stronger contractions, just more activity as the blood returns to the heart, more stress on the heart and the muscles of the wall of the heart, especially in the left ventricle. And this is fine in the moment. This is adaptive. This is what our body needs. But if we are chronically turning on the stress response and having this happen and not turning it off, so if it's on for long periods of time, then we have all of these systems, including right now we're talking about the cardiovascular system. They're overactive and they're stressed. themselves, right? And so this can result in some health problems. In the case of the cardiovascular system, one thing that happens with chronic stress, first I said the blood vessels are going to dilate. Well, over time, if the blood pressure doesn't return to normal, so the first thing that can happen, you can see, is hypertension or chronically high blood pressure. And when that happens too, those blood vessels, they have to be able to withstand for longer periods of time all that blood coursing through the body with, that intense pressure. And so they need to get thicker with muscle to be able to keep up and do that properly, but also they're going to become more rigid eventually. And then this is going to become a problem because then it's harder for the blood to move through, and they're actually going to start to constrict more too. And another thing that happens is when we have all this blood coursing through our body, we have other stuff in our blood, cholesterol, other sorts of substances that are also being released during the stress response. Glucocorticoids, these sorts of things. And that's now going throughout our body, which, isn't necessarily a bad thing in and of itself. But again, if we're not using this stuff up in the way that we need to, such as by fighting off a predator, really exerting ourselves physically, then it can become a problem. A major part of this, as it kind of all comes together, is our blood vessels. They go all throughout our body, and they get very, very teeny tiny. And so just as an example here, if you can see on the leg, on the upper thigh, our blood vessels split off like this, and these are called points of bifurcation. And when that happens, it happens. That's just how our blood vessels are. But at these points of bifurcation, they're more susceptible to rupture and tearing when we have increased, especially chronic blood pressure. So if there's a lot of blood chronically hitting against those spots and the blood needs to branch off into one or the other, it's a weaker point. Because it's suddenly, there was this much blood coming through this area, and then it hits this wall, and then it's, has to split off into these two areas. So these points of bifurcation can be a really susceptible spot to tearing and ruptures and things like this, which then can get clogged with all that stuff happening that's just floating around in our body to help us with the stress response, give us energy and that sort of thing. But this can lead to plaques, to clogging, to clog blood vessels and arteries, which then, they can end up in the heart, they can end up in the brain if they break off, and they certainly can obstruct blood flow. So this is why we have higher risk of things like heart attack and stroke as well. Okay, see how we're doing on time. Okay, so next is the respiratory system. There isn't a whole lot to say here as far as like risks to our health, but basically our airway will constrict between our nose and our lungs, and we're going to be breathing more shallow because of it. And if we already have an underlying condition like asthma, stress can certainly worsen that breathing problem. So that's something to take note of. Okay, so in order to target kind of both of these systems, we're actually kind of using our respiratory system to get at our cardiovascular system, and especially our vagus nerve. We're going to do some vagal breathing or diaphragmatic breathing or belly breathing or deep breathing. It has lots of different terms. So I would like you to do this with me if you're able to right now. So place your hands on your stomach, or maybe rather one on your stomach and one on your heart. Take a moment, just get a comfortable spot. And what we're going to do is we're going to breathe in. So right now, maybe just focus on taking some deeper breaths than you normally would. And pay attention to where you feel the rise and fall when you breathe. Can you feel your stomach inflating with air like a balloon? Or do you feel your chest rising when you breathe in? Okay. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take a few timed breaths. We're going to inhale to the count of 4. Then we're going to hold our breath for 6 seconds. And we're going to exhale for 8 seconds. Okay? So let's inhale. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. And exhale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let's do it one more time. Inhale. Hold. Exhale. One more time. Inhale. Hold. Exhale. Wonderful. If we can set aside time during our day to practice this, 5 minutes at a time, or maybe, 3 to 5 cycles of this. This is directly talking to our cardiovascular system through our vagus nerve. What we're doing is this is very bottom up. Of course, we're thinking about doing it, so it's top down, right? But we're purposefully changing the way that we are breathing to communicate differently to our whole system. So we definitely can do this when we're feeling stress, taking a short little break to breathe, especially, if there's nothing else you can remember in the moment than to really expel all of your air as you exhale. Exhale as slow as you can, get all of your air out. This is going to be turning on our parasympathetic nervous system, and that is our rest, digest, connect, come down and calm our stress response. Okay. Next, our endocrine system and our immune system. So our endocrine system includes different parts of our brain, including the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, the thyroid gland, pancreas, and adrenal glands. These are going to be regulators and secretors of different hormones. And our immune system is also kind of implicated in that. We hold not a lot, most of our immune system is in our gut. I don't have a diagram of the immune system per se, but that's also implicated in understanding our endocrine system and talking about stress. So I already mentioned our hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or the HPA axis, and this is going to turn on or off, and this is the slow system as I talked about. So it does take a little bit of time because these hormones have to kind of they have to course throughout our whole body. But this is turned on or not depending on, again, whether we are appraising that there's threat. So either this is kind of automatically that our amygdala is turning on our alarm system, or we are talking about it, thinking about it cognitively, consciously, and saying like, hey, this is a stressful situation, or, oh, I'm in danger. So we're gonna experience epinephrine, or I mentioned another name for that is adrenaline. So energy and cortisol, which is the stress hormone, those are going to be released throughout our body. That gives us energy. And it's also going to, right in the moment when we're having that immediate stressor, it's going to suppress our immune system during that time. So we don't need it right now. We do need immediately. We need this energy. We need our blood flowing. We need to be breathing faster so that we can survive in that situation. But right in this very moment, we don't need the immune functioning per se. It's all about conserving energy, these systems, right? But then during recovery from stress, then our immune system is going to be highly activated. And so that's the case whether we sustained injury or not. So if we have a psychological stressor and it's just something we're thinking about, we still have this immune activation afterwards. And so what happens if we have chronic stress, so stress that is sustained for long periods of time, like a global pandemic, for example, or things like poverty, things like, experiencing racism throughout your life, things like experiencing abuse within your family home as a child. These are things that don't have a clear-cut beginning and an end. the global pandemic hopefully will, but this is certainly a prolonged stressor, right? And as I mentioned too before, we can kind of make something chronic by the way that we ruminate and think about it again and again in an unhealthy way. So when this happens, the communication between our HPA axis and other parts of our body are going to be impaired, which means that our glucocorticoids, so including cortisol, epinephrine, the receptors in our brain to make sense of those things, they're going to become less sensitive to the effects of those glucocorticoids. And then we're going to have chronic immunoactivation, or just like an overactive immune system. And this can lead to a variety of health problems. So one way that we can change this, and this really I thought fit nicely in this section, because we can, as we did before, we did some breathing to kind of hack our vagal nerve, vagus nerve, our vagal tone, it's called, and our cardiovascular system. We can't really do that with our endocrine system, right? Or our immune system. We can get lots of sleep and things like that, which are important, and I'll talk about. But what else could we do? Well, as we mentioned, the HPA axis is going to be a bit slower, and it's going to be turned on in response to how we're appraising threat. And this is also going to be, it's kind of us sustaining the stressor and dealing with it long term. So especially if we can change our thoughts and the way that we're appraising this situation or making sense of it as stressful or life-threatening or just a challenge or neither, then we can, from the top down, we can change, how much of the system is activated, or we can help to dampen it or slow it down. So this tip kind of comes from cognitive behavioral therapy, because our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors are all related together, and that's a major tenet, a foundation of cognitive behavior therapy. So what we can do when we're in the face of a stressor is we can sit down with a pen and a paper. We can also think through it too, but sometimes the act of writing it out can be very helpful. And we're going to try to identify a thought, a feeling, and a behavior associated with that stressor. So for example, this is completely hypothetical. I'm so glad to be doing this today. I love doing this. But let's just say that my thought last night was, I don't want to give this webinar tomorrow. The feeling related to that would probably be anxiety or dread. I'm dreading doing it. Again, this is completely hypothetical. I'm happy to be here today. And so because I'm having that feeling when I think about giving the webinar tomorrow, I'm going to completely distract myself and I'm going to organize the playroom instead. Okay, so they're all related. And this might also be the case that I don't notice my thought or my feeling right away. Instead, maybe my partner alerts me to the fact that, hey, you're organizing the playroom right now. I didn't know that that's something that needed to be done. Like, why are you doing that? Or don't you have a webinar tomorrow that you've been kind of stressed about? Didn't you want to prepare for that? And so I think, oh, okay, yeah, what have I been thinking? Why am I not doing this? I'm going to think about it for a minute. Oh, okay, I don't want to give this webinar tomorrow. Well, why don't I want to? Because I'm feeling this way. So they're all related, and we can start at any part to make sense of all of it. So what can be helpful to do is to try to dig a little deeper, especially with your thoughts. So, maybe the thoughts that I don't want to give this webinar tomorrow, but then it's like, well, why? What's really the thought that I'm telling myself? And maybe underneath that, when we dig a little bit deeper, maybe underneath that, the thought is also, well, what if I screw up? Or I'm scared, or I'm not good enough. And then it's very clear that the feeling is fear. And when I have this cycle now, this looks a little bit different, and it doesn't make sense to just clean the playroom anymore if I know that I'm just feeling scared and I'm especially worried about screwing up. well, maybe it makes more sense to talk about it now. And to remind myself of past successes. Well, think of all these conference presentations that you've given. Or doing something like using a mantra like, I don't need to be perfect. I don't need to be perfect. Nobody's perfect. This can then be a new thought. So then we're changing the whole cycle. So maybe now I can think a different thought that's more helpful. Like, I can do this. I'm feeling confident, and I'm going to put in some extra effort and practice. That's going to make me more confident and continue to think I can do this, etc. We also could just change that thought right away. When we recognize that we're having a thought that maybe isn't so helpful, and we think about how that's related to certain feelings and behaviors that aren't helping the stressor, we can just change that thought. We can have a different cognitive appraisal. So my first thought is, I don't want to give this webinar tomorrow. Well, why? I better dig a little deeper. Well, what if I screw up? I'm scared. Oh, okay. You're feeling scared right now. Okay. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to feel worried. But is that feeling helping me to do my best? It's not. Instead, I'm going to think, I can do this. I'm feeling nervous, but I can do this. So I'm going to change that thought, which changes my feeling, which changes my behavior. Okay. Of course, this tip doesn't work for stressors that we, can just change or get rid of. I mean, doing a whole lot of thinking and overthinking about stressors that are kind of minor, like we can just change the stressor themselves. That's always the best bet. If we think too much, it might cause us more problems. But when we have a stressor that is uncontrollable, we definitely need to just change our thoughts about them. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Well, part of it right now. So maybe we're having a thought like, I can't handle this. So these are some common thoughts that we might be having right now in response to any stressor, especially I'm thinking about COVID and all the related difficulties that come with it. So maybe we're thinking, I can't handle this. You have 3 kids at home. Each of them are doing a different sort of distance learning schedule. They're stressed. Lots of tension, yelling, these sorts of things, lots of noise in the background. And maybe we just think, I can't handle this. I can't handle this anymore. Breathe. And can you reframe that as, this is hard, but I can do hard things. I have done them before. If you have not read the book Untamed by Glennon Doyle, I highly recommend it. We can do hard things. That's a theme throughout the book. Or maybe, this is terrible. This is so terrible. And that might be true. This all is terrible right now. And it's okay. And it's good to pay attention to those thoughts and those feelings that you have because of them, and have some compassion for yourself. But this is terrible because it just is terrible, not because I'm terrible or because I'm doing a terrible job, right? So depending on what comes after that, you might need to change the next part. But if you're just thinking about how awful this is right now, it can be helpful to remind yourself this won't last forever. I find myself thinking this if I am really, really sick, like with the stomach flu, for instance. That's the worst, right? It's terrible. But thinking about how terrible it is in the moment is only going to increase suffering. Just remind yourself it won't last forever. It won't last forever. It never does. It won't last forever, right? But of course, this sort of thing is not helpful if you have a chronic illness, right? Then maybe it's a different thought that you need to think. Maybe you think, I wish this wasn't happening. That is a fair thought. It can be more helpful, though, after that to focus on, I can't change the fact that this is happening, but I can control how it affects me. And we'll talk about control a little deeper shortly. Okay, well, I mentioned the stomach flu. Let's talk about the gastrointestinal system. So, as I mentioned, I definitely feel stress in my gut. That's a very common thing as well. There's a very good reason for that. Our gut is almost like our second brain. There are so many nerve cells and connections between our gut through the rest of our body. Of course, our brain and our gut talk together, but it almost has its own nervous system and talks through the rest of the body independently as well. So there's hundreds of millions of nerves, and there's also millions of bacteria in our gut. And those bacteria can change and talk to our brain and things like that. It's very cool. But so this gut and brain connection, it's very important. Scientists are learning more and more about it and how important of a role it really has. But it makes sense that when we are experiencing an immediate stressor, we have appetite loss. And again, thinking of ensuring our survival in that immediate moment and conserving energy. Like, it doesn't make sense to digest our lunch if we are needing to defend a predator, right? That can wait. So we might have appetite loss. We also, because of other things happening, different secretions and stuff, we might have other symptoms as well. One of those would be heartburn. We might feel difficulty swallowing. Sometimes our esophagus can constrict or even have spasms during intense stress. We also become more sensitive to the acid in our stomach during that time. We don't actually produce more acid when we're stressed, but our body becomes more sensitive to it. So we can feel it more. It's more uncomfortable. Relating in things like heartburn. We have bowel changes, such as diarrhea. And we also store nutrients in a different way and use them in a different way. So during that immediate stressor, nutrients that are already stored in our body, they're going to be converted to fast energy to glucose, and they're going to be sent throughout our bloodstream, which we kind of already talked about, right? So part of that has to do with changes in the bowel and taking out water, nutrients from the rectum and things like that, or the intestines. And then after the stressor, when our parasympathetic nervous system is then turned on, we're, resting, digesting, right? So digestion's stimulated again. We might be more hungry. We might especially be craving comfort foods, things that are fatty, starchy, sugary, and we're naturally craving those things to replenish our body, and because of increased cortisol. So if we have prolonged stress, so a stressor that lasts a long time, or if we have chronic stress and there's really no beginning and an end to this type of stress that we're experiencing, or it's unpredictable and we're not able to turn off our stress response and turn on our parasympathetic nervous system, we can have a number of problems happening. So we're going to have changes in the absorption of nutrients throughout our body, because it's trying to turn everything into energy. And so we have glucose and all these other things, cholesterols, coursing through our bloodstream, which we already talked about. That increases our risk for clogged arteries or atherosclerotic plaques that can cause bigger problems like heart attack and stroke. We also just have that gunk floating throughout our body, right? And that can cause fat deposits in our midsection around our major organs. And we also can experience changes in our gut bacteria. And then we might have increased bloating, gas, these sorts of things as well. All this together can increase risk, and also with changes in our immune system that we talked about, can increase our risk for inflammatory bowel diseases, IBD, Crohn's disease, that sort of thing. IBS is also definitely related to stress. And then, of course, because these systems are related, we already talked about the risk for cardiovascular diseases, but that does have to do as well, with the interaction with our gastrointestinal system. So here is my tip in regards to our digestive system, our gastrointestinal system. If you are finding that you're having new or worsened digestive problems, bloating, gas, just cramping, stomach aches, just changes, these sorts of things, heartburn. Of course, you obviously want to talk to your doctor about it. So I guess my tip is take it seriously and talk to your doctor about it, but also dig deeper, rather than just thinking about what heartburn medication you can take. It might be helpful to really think about what is going on in your body, right? This is what this is all about, thinking about what is my body doing? So one helpful thing could be to keep a daily journal focused on, your level of stress that day. Maybe just like a narrative of what happened that day. Maybe you could have a little rating scale. 5, this is the worst stress I've ever experienced. 0, I had no stress today. Listing maybe what feelings you were feeling throughout the day, and what you ate. Just see if you can identify any patterns. Maybe you're feeling stressed, you're going to certain types of foods, and those types of foods are causing you gastrointestinal distress. Or maybe it's because of all these things we've talked about that are happening due to our stress response itself. So next, the musculoskeletal system. This will be the last system we talk about before we get into some more tips. So our musculoskeletal system is likely what we feel besides our gut when we feel stress. When we feel that muscle tension, when we feel like our hands getting hot, when we're clenching our jaw, these sorts of things, that's our musculoskeletal system being activated by the stress response. So blood, as well as energy and other things are being sent to our muscles to prepare for fighting or fleeing, right? And this is especially true in our legs, but also our arms. We get muscle tension, or those muscles are tight and ready to, do their work. And this happens very automatically, which is why it's important to check in throughout the day and actually try to pay attention to that muscle tension that happened automatically and unconsciously that we hadn't thought about yet, right? Because if this happens over longer periods of time, this leads to headaches, neck and back pain. It can lead to chronic pain. If we have a lot of tension, we also can have inflammation. That's another natural response to stress, especially when that stressor is done and we turn on the immune system. But this can lead to other problems too, like chronic fatigue syndrome, chronic fatigue syndrome. And part of this also has to do with the way that our body kind of exchanges nutrients or converts them into energy and then back into storage, energy back into storage. And this happens in our muscles too. And so that can also contribute to chronic fatigue. So let's go a little bit deeper with our idea of relaxing our muscles. So let's do a progressive muscle relaxation first, where we're going to tense the muscles in each part of our body from top to bottom. We're going to tense them first, and then we're going to relax them really fast. So here I said do it in your lower body. It's a good place to start, but I think we can do it throughout our whole body. So what we're going to do is we are going to start with our head. And we're going to tense them first because sometimes we need to do that to fully release the tension rather than just bringing your attention to it. So we're going to start with our face muscles. Just scrunch up your face. We're going to do it for 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then relax. And just relax really fast. Now we're going to bring our shoulders up to our ears as high as we can. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Relax. Make sure you're doing it safely. We're going to tense our arms, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and our fists. Relax. And there's really no right or wrong way to do this. Tense your abdominal muscles. 2, 3, 4, 5. Relax. Throw out your hips and your buttocks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Relax. Thigh muscles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And relax. Straighten out your legs. Pull your toes up towards you. Tighten your calves. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Relax. We'll end by scrunching toes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and relax. Shake it out. Okay. So this is something we can do to really target full body, those muscles, to tense them, relax them. Just make sure that you're doing it safely and that nothing hurts. Okay, so some key points and things that we've covered. Our mind and our body are interdependent. They work together always. Sometimes our body talks to our mind or our brain. Sometimes our brain is talking to our body. And sometimes we can think our thoughts and talk to our body. And sometimes the unconscious, subconscious, automatic, really old parts of our brain are doing the talking without us recognizing it. Our body can often tell us that we're stressed and to start that response before we're aware of it. That's why it's important to set aside time to check in with your body. Make yourself aware of it. Turn on that top-down processing. And, whether we are seeing a predator in front of us or we are just experiencing the stressors of our everyday lives, it can have the same effects on our brain, especially when we think about the ways in which our brain responds to stress and responds to pain. It's actually the same region in our brain, the same system that's understanding and taking in that information, processing it, and then communicating it out. It's the same part. And we also know that things like social isolation or social rejection, those can feel just like physical pain to our brain. So it's hard for our brain, our really old brain, to make sense of psychological stressors, because that's a relatively new thing in our evolution. And of course, COVID-19, it's a really kind of a conundrum right now when we think about the stress response, because it is a real physical danger. It is life-threatening for many people, if not arguably, like, there is, even if it's a small chance that it could be life-threatening for anybody. And yet there are so many psychological stressors that come with this issue. So it's kind of both. And that's why I really want us to pay attention to our bodies and to take the way that we are coping with our stress really seriously during this time. Stress affects different systems in our body, and it can do it in different ways. And then those systems of our body all talk to one another. It can be kind of like a snowball effect, right? And so we talked about, risk for each system, but a lot of the times it's kind of this cumulative risk to our health when we experience prolonged stress or chronic stress. So taking care of our body and our mind is so, so important, especially during this time. Let's talk briefly about good stress. Like, is there such thing as good stress? What do we think about this? Well, a really kind of ancient now principle in psychology is the Yerkes-Dodson law. And this thinks about, or rather documents across many, many studies with different types of factors, settings, people, etc., that we do need a level of arousal, of stress to perform certain functions. And so we see here that at really low levels of arousal, that this is where we experience things like, well, it can be just calm, or it could be boredom or sick, right? But if we're thinking of like our physiological reactivity, our bodily activity under the hood, things are low. And then we also have kind of like a mid-level arousal, and that's when we're focused and we're motivated, and we do pretty well with that, right? We have to have enough arousal where we feel and motivated, and we have the energy to do what we need to do. But if we have too much arousal, when our heart is beating too fast, if our body is too tense, then we have impaired performance. And what's interesting about this is this also looks like the natural stress response or activation response pattern. So this, I just came up with this right here, but this is really when you look across lots of scientific studies that measure things like, okay, so I have right on this side, physiological or hormonal activity. So maybe this is like skin conductance, so how much perspiration you have on your palms. Or maybe it's heart rate or something else. It's kind of similar. This right here is time. And this is somebody's gonna go through a stressor. So you can see that there is a peak to the stress response. So like, and you build up to it. So you're faced with a stressor and your body prepares. So actually one thing that happens a lot in stress studies with humans is they put humans through a stressor. And usually that stressor is like giving a speech to strangers, which is stressful to most everybody, right? So they know they're gonna have to do it and they have time to prepare. And while they're preparing for this speech, they have their stress response rising and rising and rising. So let's say it's their skin conductance or their heart rate. As time goes on and it gets closer to them, engaging in that stressor, their stress response is rising. And then it's gonna peak and they're giving their speech to strangers, and then their reactivity is going to go down and their parasympathetic nervous system is going to kick in and they're coming down from that stress. So this is what you want to see when we engage in stress. And when we have chronic stress, then we're staying up here. If we have unpredictable stress, then this is happening all the time and our body doesn't know when it's going to happen next, right? So just a little bit about that. Okay, but we can have good stress. Naturally, when we're engaged in a challenging activity, we have that stress response and we need it, right? And so what we consider good stress is our brain is appraising the situation as a challenge to overcome. So it's not overloading our capacity to cope with it. It's something that we can handle. And so this, in the face of a stressor that's really big, the meaning that we give it and the resources that we use or getting help, etc., are really important so that we can actually overcome that stressor. So our body's going to get activated, our awareness is heightened, we're paying more attention, we have better performance, etc. We also have the stress response when we have just positive events in our life, like starting a new job, like having a child, getting a promotion that has new responsibilities, moving. These sorts of even just positive life events are also inherently stressful, and that's okay, so long as we cope with it. So we can have good stress. It's not all bad stress. And there really, there isn't one sort of stressor or a category of things that we can consider good or bad stress. It really has to do with how we're affected by it, the meaning that we're making from it, how we're appraising it. So one person might have the exact same stressor as another person, but their resources are different. And so for them, that is bad stress. It's outside of their ability to cope with it. And the other person might be able to cope with it. Or it might come down to the story that we're telling ourselves and how we're appraising that stress. So it's kind of subjective in that way. But when we think of bad stress, the stress that's going to cause or increase our risk for health problems, it's the stress that's chronic. So there is no beginning and an end. It's just it always is. It's unpredictable. It's outside of our capacity to recover from it. So it's a stressor that happened, even if it's an acute stressor with a beginning and an end, maybe we have a really hard time recovering from it and getting over it. And we just can't cope. Or if we're unable to, we're trying to use techniques that usually work for our stress and they're not working, then it can be time to know that wow, okay, now might be the time that my body is going to start to be affected and I might have an increased risk of health problems as I'm dealing with this stressor. Okay. For the sake of time, I'm not going to play this video because it kind of just repeats and sums up the things that we talked about it. But But I encourage you, when you want a refresher, or if you just want to learn some more about it, you can just go on YouTube or the TED website. This is the TED, so these are TED Talks, and they have just the TED Ed series where they have just various animated videos like this. But again, this is just a recap and a nice little animation of how stress affects your body and can make you sick. Okay, so maybe we've realized that, wow, I've had some of those signs, or yeah, I know I'm not coping very well with things that are happening right now, which is completely understandable. What can we do about it to take better care of ourselves? So the first thing that I cringe at saying is exercise. Like I said, I'm going to take my own advice. The silver lining for those folks like me who don't like to exercise is it doesn't have to be really, really strenuous. It needs to be just aerobic exercise, not like Jane Fonda aerobics, but aerobic meaning it's getting your heart beating and you're respirating more than normal, but you're not breathing so fast that you can't talk through it. So you should be able to do this exercise and still be able to talk with somebody, which is nice too, right? And it just has to be 20 to 30 minutes a day. So for me, I can see out the window right now, it's like, okay, I just need to take a walk every day, just a walk, bundle up, go for a walk, look at lights on people's houses, whatever. I can do this. So for me, this is my goal. And I know that you all are going to hold me accountable in my mind. Okay, so I'm going to take my own advice, and that's one thing that I need to start. But really, it should be anything that you enjoy doing. Maybe it's just turning on music and just dancing. And it's like, okay, 20 to 30 minutes, that's what, 5 songs, 6 songs? Or just turn on the radio for a half an hour, dance when you're making your food for lunch or your supper, dance in the kitchen, whatever. Or maybe it's biking, or maybe it's just playing in the backyard with your kids. Anything that you enjoy doing. But this is so important when we have the stress response on in our body. We have all that stuff coursing around in our blood. We have all the blood going around in our body. We have all this extra cortisol and glucose stuff to give us energy because we're thinking about this stressor and we're not actually fighting off a bear or predator, right? That's just happening in our body. And then we don't exert ourselves like our body thinks we need to do. So exercise is a great way to do that. Mindfulness, okay. Exercise and mindfulness can go together. I kind of think about them as very separate because mindfulness is a very just calm, present in the moment sort of thing. But really in a nutshell, anytime when you can be present and paying attention to your body, anytime that you can stop multitasking and just do one thing and really pay attention to it, you're going to turn on your parasympathetic nervous system. When we do that, we're turning off our stress response. So, next time you're cooking, just really pay attention to those vegetables you're chopping. Or next time you're eating, just pay attention, with all of your senses to your food, or really think about all the different flavors. I mean, it can be things that you incorporate just in very small moments in your life. You also could, set aside 5-10 minutes or more and just do some of the breathing like we practice doing, okay? And just paying attention to your body. And if this seems like something that would feel good for you, or if you're not sure, but you're willing to try it because there's lots of scientific research on the physical and mental health benefits of mindfulness and thousands of years of humans practicing it. You could also do some guided meditations. I find that these are a lot easier sometimes when I have a very, very busy mind and I'm not able to myself calm my body and my mind down, then sometimes having somebody guide you through it can be helpful. So calm.com and mindfulness.org, they have wonderful apps that you can use. Calm is free, but there's a lot of extra stuff that you have to pay for. There's also Stop, Breathe, and Think. And I'm sure there are others as well that you can use. And there's also just like free YouTube videos of guided meditations, as well as if you use Spotify or another streaming service, there are playlists and things like this too. That can just, have you sit and breathe. There's other practices besides breathing as well. And, it can last anywhere between 3 minutes and, 35 minutes, whatever suits you. So I highly recommend that. Naming it. So name it to tame it. In the child psychology world, is something that we can tell our kids. But really this just means turning on our top-down processing, making sure that we are taking control of the situation. So a lot of times if we're feeling stressed, we might just like feel it in our body, right? So for example, a situation that's not, it's not life-threatening, it's great, but it's stressful for me, is cooking dinner sometimes. Sometimes I become really overwhelmed by a lot of auditory stimuli. So if I have a couple of pots on the stove, they're sizzling, boiling, etc., I need to turn the fan on. It starts to become really overwhelming. Usually I just focus on getting things done, so my mind is on the task at hand and what needs to be done when. But my body is just interpreting this as stressful. And so I start to become tense, and then maybe in the background, because I'm loud in the kitchen, the music gets turned up, or the TV gets turned up, or the voices are louder as they're talking to each other over my noise, or they come in trying to talk to me and I blow up and I snap at somebody, get out of the kitchen, whatever it is. And I don't mean to, right? And I was feeling all this stuff, and somewhere in my brain was saying like, hey, it's really loud. That's maybe not safe right now, or hey, pay attention to this. And I'm not taking a moment to remind myself, hey, you're cooking dinner right now. Everything's fine. I know that it's really loud right now, but you can handle it, right? Or just naming, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling frustrated. I'm determined to get dinner done, but I'm overwhelmed by the noise. Just naming it turns on a different part of our brain. We have activity in the prefrontal cortex. When we're just experiencing emotions, we're feeling them or experiencing them in our thalamus or amygdala, or different, emotional centers of our brain. But when we can name it, we are purposefully thinking about it, turning on our prefrontal cortex, turning on top-down process that talks everywhere else. So I encourage you to, when you are feeling those feelings of stress in your body, or you're taking a moment to reflect, try to use really specific words. Maybe you're doing that triangle like we did with the thoughts and the feelings and the behaviors, and use specific words to describe your feeling. A lot of times we say things like upset, and that's not very helpful for us in making sense of what's going on, or understanding what we need, because each feeling has a different purpose evolutionarily in our body, or for our body and for our relationships. So if we're feeling sad about something, we need something different than if we're feeling anxious. Like if I'm sad, I want a hug. If I'm anxious, I might need to ask for help about something, right? Or especially angry. If I'm angry, I don't want a hug. So you need something very different. But I could say I'm upset to describe both, and then I don't know what I need, and the people who could help me don't know what I need, right? So it's really important to use specific words and really use your brain in the way that it's there. Social connection's a big one. Of course, this is so hard for us right now, but maybe just try to set something up with your loved ones over Zoom or what have you. Try to switch it up. We're reading books right now. Can you send that book when you're done to somebody else and have a book club about it? There's so many different online games that you can play, or games that can be used in an online format. Sometimes we just need to switch it up and make it more engaging, because it's just not the same as meeting together, right? Another type of social connection that's really going to kind of give us a bang for our buck and really turn on our parasympathetic nervous system, which means turn off our stress response, is to connect to our community. So, can we put nice signs in our windows like everybody was doing for a while? Can we shovel for somebody? Can we leave notes in people's mailboxes? Or if we're doing baking, can we drop off some extra goodies for neighbors? Giving and kindness, when we can do kind acts for the people in our family or the people in our community, give where we can. That's the same sort of idea. And it's going to feel good in our bodies. And when we're connecting with other people, this goes along with what I was talking about in the slide previous. Make the most out of the connection that you have with others, and let them know, hey, I have this thing going on. I want to talk about it, and I just really need to vent. Do you have 10 minutes? Or I need to hear that I'm not alone. Or tell them, I'm really looking for advice about this problem. Or, making sure that you're getting what you need. A lot of people like to jump to giving advice when they hear that people are feeling stress or feeling negative emotions or going through something stressful, but sometimes we don't need that, right? So we can say something like, I want to talk about something, I really need to vent. Do you have time today to talk about it? But I got to tell you, I'm not open to hearing any advice about it yet. I really just need to vent. And make sure that we're getting good quality connection, because the quantity is few and far between right now. Solving our problem. If we can solve the problem that's causing us stress, that's fantastic. That's getting rid of the stressor, right? But sometimes we can't solve that problem. And so if we think about all the different things that we could have done, or somebody else could have done, or that we wish we could have done, it's not going to make it any better than we're actually ruminating, and we're turning an acute stressor into a chronic one. We're keeping our stress response on over something that's already happened. So we don't want to do that. But if there's a problem going on right now and there's maybe something about it we can change, then that can help to eliminate our stress. So maybe it's that, the morning routine is so hectic, trying to get all the kids set up in their learning nooks and figure out who has what to do today, and getting your own work ready and all this sort of thing. Is there something about that could be helped? Can you communicate with the teacher and get the assignments the night before? Can you split the duties between you and your partner if you have a partner? Is one child maybe ready to do that work themselves, or just give it a try for a while and see what happens? Is there something about it that could be changed? And there might not be, and that means that we can't use problem solving, and that's okay, because there are things we can do. But there might be things that we can do that we haven't thought about. So sitting down and really kind of picking apart that stressor and thinking about all the gears that turn that can contribute to that stressor can be helpful. Okay. Nutrition is something that is helpful as well. If we are feeling stressed and come down from it a lot, when we come down from it, we're going to crave those comfort foods. I'm talking from experience right now. But if we can just, for me right now, smoothies are helpful, especially now that it's wintertime. We don't have a lot of good local fresh produce, at least fruits. Get the frozen stuff. It's more economical, cost effective. Throw it in a blender, make a smoothie. Just trying to moderate how much I'm having comfort foods. If I'm really wanting to reach for it, having a check-in and thinking about, okay, is there something that I need right now? And what am I feeling right now? Comfort foods are good in moderation. We don't want to deprive ourselves of anything, but if we're only eating those sorts of things, then we're missing out on important things. So, maybe just thinking about what can I add in my diet? What fruits and vegetables can I add, rather than thinking about limiting the comfort foods, especially it's the holiday season now, right? Eating at a predictable time is really important too. Our body knows when we're going to eat, and our insulin will actually be released when we're usually going to eat. So that's important to keep ourselves on a schedule. trying to limit alcohol, as hard as that could be for many people right now when you just want to unwind after the day, etc. But that also has effects and can increase our feelings of anxiety and things having to do with like the GABA receptors in our brain and other sorts of things. So it can be helpful to kind of have a check-in and pay attention about how much alcohol you're consuming. And also, right now is a tough time for so many people, so I wanted to include this list of different resources for food shelves, things like this, to make sure that you are able to get the food that you need to take care of your nutrition. No shame in this stuff. Those resources are there for a reason, and the the next $600 stimulus check doesn't go a whole lot of way for people right now. So, okay, we already talked about muscle relaxation. We practiced that together, but other things like stretching, like giving yourself a massage on those spots that are sore or asking for one from a loved one. Maybe you can lay down, your kids can play cars on your back. Just taking a bath, hot shower, these sorts of things are helpful. Sleep is a big one. Try to keep on a consistent schedule. Try to avoid screens before bedtime. Dim the lights. These sorts of things. There are, if you're having a hard time sleeping, sleep meditations or stories might be helpful. So if you have a streaming service, or you could download an app on your phone or some other device that can play that for you. There are lots of wonderful sleep meditations and stories. There's one in particular from Calm.com, one of the free ones, narrated by David Attenborough, the nature show guy. And it's about lavender fields, and I cannot make it through the whole thing without falling asleep. It's fantastic. So it might seem like I'm not going to listen to bedtime stories, but give it a try. You might actually like it, but if not, it's okay. Make sure you're doing things that you enjoy right now. Of course, there are so many things that we used to love to do that we can't do, but there's got to be at least one thing that you still enjoy doing. So make sure that you are making that a priority to take care of yourself. Because when we're doing things that we enjoy, we're not stressed, right? Especially if we can do them with other people. But just find what works for you. Whatever works for you to take care of your stress. If you're not hurting yourself or somebody else, just make sure that you're making that a priority. And also, if you're finding that you don't like activities that you used to like, or you used to engage in this hobby all the time, and now you have no interest in it, if you're finding there's really nothing that you're enjoying right now, please take that seriously, because that can be a symptom or a sign of depression. Thinking about what we can control, kind of in the vein of thinking about our problem solving. This can be very helpful right now. So there are certain things that we can still control, even though there are many things that we cannot control, like when we can get a vaccine or the rates of COVID in our community and these sorts of things, right? We'll talk about a practice to think about this in the next slide. But I do want to just touch on a little bit more why we want to focus on what we can control. Well, first of all, when we have a predictable schedule, we're practicing things like, having our stress response turn on, such as like when we're focusing on a task and we have to, meet a deadline, or we respond to this email, or we're hurrying to make dinner, and then we come down from it. When we are doing these sorts of things on a predictable schedule, it helps our body practice recovering from stress. So that's good. We also right now are all experiencing a loss of predictability because of COVID-19, and just having a loss of predictability usually triggers a stress response, just naturally. We, as human beings, like to know what's going to happen. We like to have a feeling of predictability because that's safe. And when we can't predict what's going to happen, our alarm system in our brain is going off. So it's important to focus on the things that we can control and to incorporate some predictability and routine into our lives if we haven't thus far. One thing that we can do is just when thinking about COVID is top down. We're going to take control over this, alarm that's going off. Maybe that alarm, even if we're not aware of it, is thinking about the worst case scenario. So whatever that is for you, whether that is somebody, you or there's somebody in your household getting sick from COVID, dying from COVID, or a family member dying from COVID, maybe it's losing a job, whatever that worst case scenario is, it can be helpful to actually take time and kind of make a plan for it, because then you've already thought about it, you've prepared for it, and then you can, now it's out of your control. You've done what you can control about the potential hypothetical worst case scenario. So to that end, I should have switched these two around. This can be handy if the worst case scenario for you and your family is like if somebody got COVID, okay, here are some things that you can do. Make sure that you have your medications, some activities, because you're gonna be stuck at home for 2 weeks. Do you have enough canned food? There's somebody who could deliver something for you if you need it. Do you have somebody to care for your children if you were to end up in the hospital? Thinking about these things is important. Thinking about them is stressful, right? And a lot of us might want to avoid thinking about them, but hey, COVID rates are still rising. This thing is still real. It's still this uncontrollable stressor. So there is something we can control, and that's having a plan. Okay. But so here's a practice that we can do along these lines, and just thinking about what we can control and what we can't. And so if you have a piece of paper, go ahead and do this right along with me right now. But I made this just so you can see it. But basically just draw a circle on a piece of paper, and what's going to go in the circle is the things that you can control right now. So the things that I can control, and this is focused on like a particular stressor. So right now I'm thinking COVID-19 and all the stress that goes with it. You could also look at just like, what can I control in my life, broadly speaking, or you could just focus on one particular source of stress, right? But anyway, things that I can control right now are my own social distancing behaviors. I can control when I go to sleep and getting more sleep, not staying up so late. I can control what I eat, that I'm putting enough fruits and vegetables in my body. I can control the type of news that I consume. That's going to impact my stress. Maybe it makes more sense that I only consume local news right now. Maybe it's NPR, Minnesota Public Radio, because I only need to know what's going on in my community. Maybe it's just my local news in my specific community that I'm reading right now, because the rest is too overwhelming and I know that it makes me stressed out, right? Maybe it's that I am not going to read any news on social media. I'm going to go straight to the source and make sure that it's credible. Okay, that can help cut down on stress. But I'm in charge of what I consume, what channel I turn on, what app I look at or not, etc. I can choose to go for walks. I've chosen not to so far, but I'm telling all of you right now, and you in my mind are going to hold me accountable to do that. I can choose to call my family once a week or more. I can choose to just set aside 5 mindful minutes every day. I had to go to the dentist the other day, and there was a little stress being in there because I really don't go out much for COVID. And I was waiting, and usually that would be something that would feel kind of like annoying, having to wait. And I especially was not wanting to be in there any longer than I needed to because of COVID. But during that waiting time, I did breathing, and I really just focused on, I just did some mindful breathing, focused on where I felt my breath in my body, and it actually was fantastic. I could choose to budget my money. I can't control whether any of us will lose a job because the economy, and what have you, but I can choose to know what I'm doing with my money right now. Okay. I can't control the COVID-19 rates in my community, my country, the world, etc. I can't control whether my kid can be in school right now. There might be a time that I can choose to have them go or not, but right now it's not my choice. I can't choose to go on a vacation right now. And I can't control others' social distancing practices, whether they wear masks, etc. So I can conclude a few things by, looking at this exercise. So one is there's a whole lot more inside my circle of control than outside, and that feels good. It feels good to have control over stuff, right? And I also know that if I find myself throughout the day thinking about any of these things that are outside of my circle of control, I can come back to this and think, listen, that's something that I can't control. If I'm thinking about it, I'm just turning on my stress response right now for no reason. Like I'm gonna label my feeling. I'm anxious. I'm worried seeing that COVID-19 rates have increased, for example. Now I can choose to do something about that worry. I can talk about it with somebody. I can call my family. I can do something else that's in my control. So I encourage you to use a practice like this, especially if you find yourself spending a lot of mental energy and ruminating about things that are outside of your control. Okay. Generally speaking, we're about wrapping it up here. Just monitor yourself, keep an eye on yourself. We are talking about, thinking about whether you still enjoy the things that you used to, thinking about, do you have new aches and pains or digestive problems? Pay attention to how you're sleeping. Are you more agitated than lately? Are you feeling really stressed and not knowing what to do about it? Or are you really actively trying to cope and your strategies and techniques, things that usually would work, just aren't working? These are good signs that some more help would be helpful for you. So, talking about it with somebody else, getting some more social support, or getting some professional help. Just really, really keep an eye out on yourself and pay attention to how your body is doing, because it's telling us so much every day. Some other things to think about as we're monitoring ourselves are, those strategies that we're using, are they really helpful for us right now? So things like staying super busy, taking on all these household projects, that can be really helpful for our stress. But if it's at the expense of paying attention to our feelings, if we're just keeping ourselves busy and distracting ourselves and never having time to check in with ourselves, then it might not be that helpful. If we're drinking too much, or if we're only eating comfort foods, or if we're eating them to excess or to the point of feeling sick. Exercising, of course, is so helpful for our stress, but are we exercising so much that we're prioritizing it above everything else, or that we're losing too much weight? Things like this. Thinking happy thoughts. We are in control of the thoughts that we think, and that's fantastic. And that's one of the ways that we can cope with stress, is by changing the way we think about it. But if we only think that we have to feel happy, or just like, nope, I'm just going to choose to be happy, and that's only my attitude right now, positive vibes only, that isn't going to be as helpful for us, because we do have to pay attention to those real feelings that we're having, because we can't wish them away. We can't think them away. They're there, and they're just going to stay there and come out in our body instead. Napping, taking a restful, restorative nap here and there, or a time that fits within your schedule, that can be very helpful. But if we're finding ourselves taking a nap just because we're super overwhelmed and we don't want to do the thing that we're avoiding, then that's not going to be as helpful for us if it's something that's happening often, right? It can be helpful to not engage in the thing that's causing us stress, right? To just it's not going to be a problem anymore because I'm not going to do it. Of course, getting rid of the stressor that's the best thing, but sometimes that's not helpful. Like maybe the thing that is causing us stress is being outside. Maybe we're developing a fear of being outside because of COVID. And part of that is warranted, right? If we're in a very highly populated area, if we live in an apartment complex, things like this, But there are still safe ways to do things, within your comfort level, and maybe going for a walk or getting fresh air and being in nature, which is also very good for our stress response. Maybe those are things that we're really missing out on. And so, it's all about balance. There are some online screening tools that are very helpful as well. I really like the stress screener. So mhanational.org/self-help tools. If you just Google this, it'll come up, but there's a stress screener that's fantastic. There are also screeners for particular mental health conditions at this website as well. So as part of keeping an eye on yourself and monitoring how you're doing, this can be helpful for that. Especially because it gives you more of an objective view of what's going on. These are, scientifically validated, reliable, reputable sorts of screeners to use. And so that can give you information that maybe puts things in a different light for you. I also like this worksheet that can be found at mhanational.org, because starting new habits is hard, right? Look at me talking about just going on a walk every day. I know that I should do it, it's something I want to change, and it's something that I, to this point, have not incorporated yet into a routine reliably. So just, thinking through that process a little bit and what change will be like and what are the benefits and how can I hold myself accountable? Sometimes that can be helpful. And if you also find that, your stress, you feel like it's to the point that it's really affecting your health, it's affecting your mental health, your well-being, it's beyond your capacity to cope, getting help can be really important. So of course, I mentioned talking to your primary care physician or, whoever your doctor is. That can be a really good first step, because our body is, of course, very implicated in this, but also thinking about, what psychologically we can do about it, and getting mental health, professional help could be warranted or be very helpful for you. So to that end, working within your insurance network is a good first step and kind of necessary for many of us. Giving them a call or going on the website and seeing who's in network. You can search on APA.org or psychologytoday.org to find providers in your area, and they have bios and all that you can read and learn about them. Ask them if they offer telehealth or in-person services. That's a big deal in this time right now. And also, we at Fernbrook are offering free consultations. These are 1-hour mental health consultations. You can give us a call at 507-446-0431 anytime between 8 and 5. And you can be set up with a mental health professional or professional in training with a therapist to basically get a free hour of therapy. Talk through some of the things that are going on right now, and just no pressure. You get what you need from it. Can talk about different coping strategies to try, what's going what's going well, what's not going well. Go ahead and give us a call. And the last thing that I wanted to share are some workbooks. So these are ones that I want to say I haven't tried myself, but they are very highly rated on Amazon. And sitting down to spend some time, just like a guided meditation could be helpful. Like sometimes you need some structure. You need a way to kind of more systematically work through these stressors. So these journals all have to do with just reflecting, really engaging in that top-down processing to dampen our stress response. And they're usually focused on things like gratitude too, which feels really good in our bodies. Okay, so there's the 5-minute journal, practicing mindfulness, 52 lists. There's 52 lists for calm. There's 52 lists for happiness. I'm Here Now is more of a creative journal with a variety of mindfulness activities, drawing and things like this. And just in conclusion, I want to say, try to be kind to yourself, show yourself some compassion, do what you can, let the rest go. Just forgive yourself if you've had a hard time to this point. It's understandable. This is a hard time for everybody. Try to stay connected to those people who bring you joy. Think of, quality over quantity. Try to make meaning of what's going on right now, the hard things that have happened. Try to make sure that you know that you matter. So what is it in your life that can bring you purpose right now when so many other things are upside down and we're so restricted in so many other areas? Lean on those people who bring you joy. Get what you need out of those interactions. Don't be afraid to talk about your feelings and your stress right now. We need it. And let them do the same for you. And of course, we don't need to pay attention to every feeling whenever we feel it. That would not be helpful. But make sure that you set aside time regularly to check in with yourself and to pay attention to those feelings. If we're suppressing them all the time, they're just going to get worse. If you need immediate mental health support, or if there is somebody who does that if somebody's in immediate danger, please call 911. You can also call the crisis response of Southeast Minnesota at 855-274-7472. Or if you would like to be guided over text message, you can do that by texting HOME to 741-741 and be connected to the crisis text line. Here are some helpful websites as well. APA.org, CDC.gov. They have a lot of mental health resources that are great. NAMI, MACMA is the Minnesota Association of Children's Mental Health. And the State of Minnesota Health Department also has a variety of really great resources in taking care of our mental health during this time. Okay, let's see here. There we go. So we are all finished today. This is all I have for our time and talking about stress and coping. And this is a very stressful time. Sometimes we might feel like we are beyond our capacity to cope, and know that although we've talked about all those kind of scary health implications that can come from that we do have a lot within our control, and there are things that we can do about it. We're not helpless in all of this, in these processes, even though some of them are very automatic. We have our prefrontal cortex. We have the special ability as humans to really control our thoughts and control the whole game. So if you find some of these helpful, that's fantastic. Feel free to reach out to your loved ones and reach out for professional support if you feel that that's needed at this time. And that is it for today. I hope to see you next time after the new year. We're going to talk about some ways that we can take care of the children in our lives.